Naval Observatory time indicates it is 6:30, and so it's time to call to order this regular meeting of the West Valley City Council. By way of roll call, we'd like to note that 3rd District Council member Karen Lang has asked to be excused tonight, and Mayor Mike Winder, who is a regular voting member of this council, has also asked to be excused. Joining us on the dais tonight is our city recorder, Ms. Sherry McKendrick, and our city manager, Mr. Wayne Pyle. Those at home watching on the internet or via Channel 17, we start each meeting off with an opening ceremony and take turns as council members and the manner and mode in which that opening ceremony is performed. And this week the duty and obligation falls to at-large council member Don Christensen. So, council member, we turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. During the last few weeks, I've had some experiences with an exchange student situation with several people from Nantou, Taiwan, our sister city. And it has just brought to my mind even more completely the beauty that we have here in our country and the many freedoms that we have here. And so would you all please rise with me and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate you starting us off with that. Item 4 on our agenda is the time we set aside for special recognitions, maybe a dignitary or a special visitor that we might have. And during this time, what we like to do is honor and recognize the young men of the Scouts that often frequent this chamber. And so is there one scout troop over here, or is there two? Okay, so what we like to do is if you can designate real quickly, by the time I get done speaking here, maybe a senior patrol leader or a young boy leader to come up to the microphone and just tell us what troop you're from and whereabouts in the city or what school you live by, and what brings you to our council meeting tonight. We have some nerves here.
We're from West Valley City, Diamond Ridge area. We're from Troop 951. We are here to earn our merit badges. And yeah.
Oh, well, thank you for being here tonight. And that was, you were very well prepared for that, young man, so thank you. Welcome to your troop.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I believe there are 2 other scouts here that are not part of that troop.
Oh, okay, thank you.
We might hear from them as well.
They have a little blind spot here, and so if we get a boy leader from this other scout group to come up.
My name is Kurt Bell, and I'm from Troop 144.
Okay. And what brings you to the council meeting tonight?
I'm here to get my citizenship in the community merit badge.
Excellent. We hope you learn something tonight and help you achieve that merit badge. Thanks for coming up.
And there's one more.
Okay.
I'm good at spotting these.
Oh, that's good. Scouts. You must have previous experience.
I'm Jordan Christopher. I'm from Pack 479, and I'm here to finish my merit badge.
Okay. And somewhat, what school do you go to in our city?
Rolling Meadows.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here tonight and coming up and introducing yourself. Here in West Valley, we are employees are kind of a tight-knit group of a family of sorts, and we're proud of the 800-some employees we have to set aside some time monthly to honor one of them as our Outstanding Employee of the Month. So at this time, we'd like to turn the time over to Councilmember Steve Vincent to present our Employee of the Month for July 2012 to Ms. Brooke Perez.
If we could have Brooke stand. Thank you. This was submitted by Nancy Day, who is the director of the fitness center. Brooks has worked at the Family Fitness Center for many years. Her professionalism with customers and other staff are highly regarded as an asset that the Family Fitness Center cherishes. She has shown outstanding customer service with all the patrons, from the very young to the very old. She handles complaints, battles on the basketball court, and even staff drama in such a way that those involved leave with a better understanding of the fitness center policies and a tolerance, as well as feeling that they were indeed a priority as Brooke listened to their concerns. These skills are innate to Brooke's character and a value to the city. In addition to these great traits and professional attributes, Brooke is also very aware of security and safety of the facility and its patrons. Several months ago, a male patron stole some money from one of the cash registers. As soon as she became aware of the situation, Brooke immediately contacted the police department and Nancy Day, and she followed the individuals to the Acorn Arena. The suspect got away, but the next week, when he returned to the fitness center, Brooke was able to ID him, and he was promptly arrested. In another situation, Brooke noticed a suspicious-looking patron leaving to the parking lot. The individual was going from car to car. Brooke was vigilant in her watch and soon realized that something just wasn't right, so she contacted our maintenance supervisor, Alvin Epson. Alvin went outside to talk to him, and as the man took off in one of the cars, Alvin followed him in a city car. He stayed with him until the police department was able to catch up with him and make an arrest. Without Brooke's sense of awareness and responsibility to the city and the Family Fitness Center, these individuals would not have been caught. I believe that these situations, along with her professionalism and ever-apparent customer service skills, make Brooke a wonderful candidate for Employee of the Month for West Valley City. And again, we appreciate that, and it's a good thing that all these cameras are here for you. So. Yeah. If you could come on up here. Here's the plaque. And here's the write-up. And here's the best part of everything. What is that? Thank you so much.
We have several items of business tonight, a public hearing, as well as a new ordinance and a number of resolutions and so on. But before we do that, we've set aside each council meeting no more than 30 minutes to have a public comment period for members of the public to come and discuss any items that are not scheduled for regular business. And don't have any on the sign-up sheet tonight, so with that, if there's no public comment tonight, then we will pass that and move on to our public hearing tonight and ask City Manager Wayne Pyle to please introduce that for us.
Thank you, sir. So the public hearing tonight is for the purpose of receiving input and council consideration of a request by Mr. Corey Angel for a zone change that would allow some development of a property that he owns. This property is at 4448 South and 4460 South, 3600 West. And the request is to amend the zoning map to show a change from agriculture or A to R18 single family residential, and then also to enter into a development agreement for 0.6 acres of this property, which in total is 2.2 acres. Now there are existing structures and buildings on that property now that go back quite some time. There are 2 duplexes. I think there's another building as well, single family home if I remember correctly. And the purpose of the rezone and the subdivision change is to allow a 4th lot to be created and then proceed for development of that.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. I will now open the public hearing and ask for input regarding application Z5 2012. Has anybody come to speak regarding this application? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And council members, we have 2 items of action for your consideration tonight. Open it up to you.
Mayor Pro Tem, I move for approval of ordinance 1233.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 1233, amending the zoning map. Is there any discussion to that motion? Now I'll call the question and ask all those in favor to please say aye.
Aye.
And that appears to be unanimous. We also have Resolution 1220 associated with this application. Council members?
Mayor Pro Tem, I'll move for approval of Resolution 12-120.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion to this development agreement?
I just think it's a great addition to this area and will add value to the surrounding properties.
Thank you for that. Now call for the question on this resolution, number 1220. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Also appears to be unanimous. We'll now move into the ordinances and then the resolution section of our meeting. And just way of information, we as a city council meet each week, a week prior at 4:30 for our study meeting where we review all the ordinances, resolutions, and any other business. And so if we move through these rather quickly, it's because we've had a little bit of time to study and kick some of them around. And so with that, we'll ask our city manager to introduce ordinance 12-34 for us, please.
Thank you, sir. So some time ago, the council asked us as a staff to examine some options for modifying our ordinance that deals with the public comment period that is conducted in this meeting. We did that, brought some proposals and instances and discussion to the council, which, as the Mayor Pro Tem has mentioned, have been considered by the council. We now have that ordinance before you for consideration.
Okay, council members, have any questions or need clarification on this ordinance change?
Just make a comment that as we had our public comment period tonight and there was nobody here, this would allow us as council members, if we had anything that we would like to say, to have an opportunity as well as the city manager. So kind of opens up the public comment period to a little broader base, and so with that I'll move for approval of ordinance 1234.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 1234. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question and ask those in favor to please say aye.
Aye.
So it appears to be unanimous, and so those of you that are regulars to our meeting, you'll see a little bit different format with our public comment period, which we hope will be a little more constructive and positive and informative for all. We'll now move to item 9, which is a series of 4 resolutions, and Mr. Pyle, will you introduce a resolution 12-121 for us, please?
Thank you, sir. So this resolution would allow a lease agreement between the city and Valcom Computers, who does a lot of our computer vending for the city. And the lease agreement would allow us to purchase 10 tablet computers for the ambulance service. The ambulance service wants to be able to convert their reporting system from the paper system they're using right now to an electronic patient reporting system, which this would allow. The lease term is 3 years and is just over $31,000.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Council members, do you have any questions or clarification needs from the staff or any of the paperwork you have on this resolution?
Motion to approve resolution 12-121.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion then to approve resolution 1221. Any discussion for or against that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote and ask all those in favor to say aye.
Aye.
Appears to also pass unanimously. And Mr. Pyle, will you please introduce our next resolution 12-122, please?
You bet. Thank you, sir. So we have a resolution that would allow purchase and replacement of a server that is used in the police department for our record management system. As you know, we use the Spillman software for that purpose. This is hardware that actually is associated with that system. It's 6 years old. It's a pretty pricey piece of equipment. This resolution would authorize us to purchase a new one not to exceed $50,000.
Okay, council members, do you have any questions on this one? Or not, a motion would be in order.
We move for approval of resolution 12-122.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution 12-122. Is there any discussion to that? No, we'll call for the vote and ask all those in favor to please say aye.
Aye.
Passes. And our next one, 12-123, please.
Thank you, sir. In our stormwater division, we have a pump station project that we would like to complete on 32, well, it's about 2585 south and between 3200 west and 3270 west. This would cost $45,944. We had 3 bids for this project as we put it out, and that's the lowest responsible bid.
Council members, what's your pleasure regarding this resolution?
Move for approval of Resolution 12-123.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion to that motion before the body? Seeing none, we'll call the question and ask all those in favor to please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. So appears to pass unanimously. 12-124, please.
Thank you, sir. We have a surplus piece of property in the form of a vacant lot at 4111 South and 5400 West. The city has owned some time. And we have negotiated a potential sale of that property with Mill Creek Homes, and we're proposing to accomplish that sale. We would sell this piece for $42,000.
Council members, do you have any questions or?
Well, it seems that property is not too far from my house, and it's too bad that Mayor Pro Tem couldn't make the motion. It's, I believe it's a piece of property that a great uncle used to inhabit. So, but I'll move for approval of 12-124.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion to the motion of authorizing this sale? I guess I just add, as I was on my bike the other day and rode by this property and tried to envision what it could be. You know, it's definitely going to be an upgrade. It might be a tricky upgrade. This is a tricky corner, and I think we knew as a city when we bought this 2 years ago for the sidewalk improvements so that kids could walk to Hunter High that this would be a tricky piece of property for the city to own, but it seems like it's going to be a pretty good use, and Mill Creek Homes has some good plans for it, so I'll look forward to seeing what they are able to come up with it. So, any further comments on this? None? Then all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Unanimously, and that takes us past our resolutions and into an item of new business, and it's a little bit different for this body, and so I'd like to ask our city manager to introduce it, and then we'll have a few discussions and a few introductory pieces of how to conduct this new item of business, and we'll go from there. Mr. Pyle.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we have a grandma records appeal before us from Ms. Ann Bremner. This is regarding a denial of a records request that was made some time ago. That records request was first forwarded through the police department, which denied that appeal, and then through my office, which I also denied that appeal. So the next step in that chain of appeal is a hearing before the council. I'm going to turn over the time here for just a moment for our city attorney, Mr. Eric Bunderson, just to introduce the process and how that hearing will proceed.
Thank you, sir. We are conducting an appeal tonight under the West Valley City Code 3-16-502. At this hearing, our ordinance states that the City Council is going to allow both parties to testify, present evidence, and comment on the issues. The City Council may also allow other interested persons to comment on the issues. As the moving party, I would recommend to the council that they allow Ms. Bremner to argue first.
Okay, so I think just by way of procedure that we'll go about this and ask Ms. Bremner to come up and give us kind of a summary of her appeal request, and then I assume, Mr. Pyle, that the city will have some type of response. We'll have them, and then we'll open it up to council members if they have questions of either the appeal process or the city. So, Ms. Bremner, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. May it please the council and Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Mr. City Manager. I'm Anna Bremner. I represent Chuck and Judy Cox, and it is correct that I have filed a request and then appealed a request, and now I'm here for the third time on this appeal before you, and it'll be my final appeal before court, if court is necessary. We're here on Constitution Boulevard talking about the constitutional rights of victims. In Utah, as in most states, our constitutions have been amended to give victims rights. And I think there are no victims that I know of in my career that have been more victimized than Chuck and Judy Cox. with their daughter disappearing and losing their grandchildren to a hatchet and a fire. And this has been a tragedy for both my state and your state. And I want to also thank you for listening to me today, and thank the citizens of Utah and the press of Utah for their support for my clients. We're simply asking, under the Victims' Rights Act, and not under general public records requests, for these police reports. And your victims' rights law says this: victims have the same rights as criminal defendants. The same rights. That actually affords victims more rights in Utah than victims in my state in Washington, where the records have been disseminated in this case, under agreement that victims' rights allow for dissemination of the laws. We know that defendants have rights to police reports. Defendants have rights to discovery, absolute rights. But for the state of Utah to say, under the victims' rights legislation, beyond the constitutional amendment, that victims have exactly those same rights as defendants, I'd submit to you, ends the argument. That Chuck and Judy Cox, and they are within the definition of victims in the statute, both here and in Washington, have the right to those police reports, just like the defendant would, just like Josh Powell would have if he had been prosecuted, or anybody else. The exact same rights. Washington law, and I've cited the statutes to you in my letter, Washington law says something more specific, but not granting as many rights to victims. It says that victims have absolute rights to police reports to seek potential civil redress. And I submit to you that this case, you have to look at Washington law too, because it's back as far as 2009. West Valley City was working with the detectives in Pierce County. And the search warrants that were executed in 2010 with Detective Maxwell from West Valley City and Detective Sanders from Pierce County were done in conjunction, two states investigating together in Washington state. And that search warrant affidavit that we all know well that's been unsealed in this case was from West Valley City and the information in West Valley City. So Washington law would apply. And in Washington, the prosecutor and the police department, Pierce County Sheriffs, have agreed with me that the victims' rights law in Washington allows for complete dissemination of all of the records in their case. Importantly on that case, and I think we need to look at this very closely when we're looking at releasing police reports, there are terrible materials, and I apologize to the Boy Scouts here. I won't say anything too detailed, but there's some pretty terrible things in that file, and images that are being disseminated. We've been invited to object as victims, but it looks as if our objections will be overridden. And so the entirety of the file, the Stephen Powell journals, pictures that he took, voyeuristic materials, including of Susan Cox Powell, will be released. So I find it ironic that I'm here before you tonight arguing for release of records when we're facing what we are back home with the release. The language that was cited to me in my various appeals was the language from the statute, of course, which deals with ongoing investigation. But I want to remind you, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, that that language is this: reasonably could be expected to interfere with investigations, reasonably could be expected to interfere with investigations undertaken for enforcement, etc. So it's not just it's something ongoing. There has to be some belief that this dissemination to me, not the press, not everybody here, but to me and my clients, reasonably could be expected to interfere with an ongoing investigation by West Valley City. Let me tell you why I believe that's not the case. Number one, if these are given to me and to Chuck and Judy Cox, they don't have to go further. You can have restrictions. Second, you can ask to review in camera these records to see the last quote-unquote overt act of an investigation. Because I'd submit to you, at least from what I know, there hasn't been an active investigation for some time. And we all know that Josh Powell is dead. So I would ask you, if you're inclined to deny my request, which I don't believe should happen, to at least look in camera at these records and to see when the last actual act of investigation occurred. Because that has to be a finding by this body in writing on a denial that indeed dissemination to me and Chuck and Judy would reasonably be expected to interfere with that ongoing investigation. The ongoing investigation, we're involved right now, unfortunately, and in the midst of this tragedy, in another case where Josh Powell took out $3.5 million worth of life insurance on his wife and his kids in 2007. And of course, we know that he killed his kids in 2009. The day that his kids were buried, his brother Michael went to try and get the proceeds from New York Life Insurance Company and his sister Alina. This while my clients were going through tremendous grief and a burial of their grandchildren and their daughter missing. We're now in court over this against the Powells. Hard to believe, but we are. Because the Powells are trying to come in and take a lot of insurance money. These records could be very helpful to us because if there is an ongoing investigation, and if there's someone else besides Josh Powell being looked at, and I'm assuming arguendo, I don't know, but if there is, then if it's Michael Powell, we know he's been mentioned, at least was looked at. We know Stephen Powell is someone. These are first and secondary beneficiaries on these life insurance policies. And I think we all know that if there is, a Slayer statute comes into play, constructive trust is a big issue in this case under the Utah statute, that these records are very important to my clients because we don't know what the investigation holds. The next thing is these media portrayals of what items have been put out so far have been very, of course, of great interest to my clients because they want to know everything about the case. But every time something jarring news comes out, like blood of Susan's in the house, like she wrote a note saying that he's going to do something to me, that Josh took out this insurance they didn't know about. When these disclosures happen, it's just like a knife to their heart every time. And it's almost like taking a Band-Aid off, Maybe they just need to know it all now. Chuck and Judy would like to just see it all now. Yeah, just see it all. There's no such word as closure as we know in criminal cases for people that have murdered loved ones. But they can at least know what was done in this case and know that there's not going to be any other times that they're going to have this kind of jarring information come at them intermittently and over the last, since February, since the boys died, and then over the last years that Susan's been missing. The civil redress, we get asked a lot, is there going to be a lawsuit, all these kinds of things. And I would submit to you that when you have victims such as my clients come before you and say, we'd like to see records, don't always assume the worst, that we're doing this, or because I'm a lawyer, that we're all, being ready to run to the courthouse with a lawsuit. I mean, just think about this logic, if you indulge me for a minute, is I can get the records if I were to sue West Valley. I would get them in discovery. It would be a no-brainer. I would seek them, and I would be given the records. There'd be no reason not to give them to me in a lawsuit. If I filed a lawsuit, a tort lawsuit. But I'm not doing that. I'm here asking for records under the criminal or the victims' rights statutes. And I think that's just something to consider when you look at these types of requests, that you may, well, not be in a position where you're dealing with litigation because you have some reconciliation with victims that actually understand what happened in an investigation, can read about it, and make judgments for themselves. The certification for determination of probable cause in the case involving Danielle, or DC was her name, the mother of the little girls and the little girls, has been submitted to you. But I'd ask you to look at that again because it very clearly shows the interplay between Pierce County and the West Valley City Police. I have an extra copy here if anybody wants it, but it does talk about going back to 2009 with this inner working in the two cases. And I think that if you go under Washington law and the clear agreement by the Pierce County authorities to give us records, that law applies here today. This is a constitutional right with my clients. And I think that they also ultimately have always said they want to find Susan. Clarence Darrow said there's no justice inside or outside of court, and that's kind of how they feel right now. But there will be justice if they can find Susan, and they think they can if they can see all of this and continue their own investigation with me and my team and anyone else that wants to help us. But they're going to find her. I mean, it has to be something good that came out of this, and nothing good has happened. But they want to find Susan. They want these records. I'm here before you asking for these, and that's our sole purpose for the litigation right now, so we know the extent of suspects or people that were looked at, but also to know where she is. Then I'll entertain any questions.
I think what we'll do is we'll hear from the other side first, and if you can stick around and
Sure.
answer questions after, we'll
Okay.
meet you there. And if you have a case law that you want to hand to our city recorder that might be helpful for us to use in a deliberation of sorts.
I'd like to do that with our Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, and then I know most of us know who you are, but if you want to give us kind of introduction.
And that'll be fine. My name is Clint Gilmore. I work for the city of West Valley. I'm the police legal advisor. I'm also the assistant chief prosecuting attorney for West Valley City.
Okay, thank you.
The bottom line for the West Valley City Police Department is this. We want to solve this case. That's our purpose. The case is still active, and we are still pursuing it. Now, Ms. Bremner has indicated that there is some civil redress that she can seek. She has indicated the grandma statute or the government records statutes for the state of Washington, but that, frankly, is not what this body is here to consider. That's not the jurisdiction this body is under. We're under the Utah's grandma statute. And Utah's grandma statute in 63G 2305, subsection 9 says this, and I'm paraphrasing. Records that are created or maintained for criminal enforcement purposes are protected if the release would interfere with the investigation of a case. It's the position of the West Valley City Police Department that any release of these documents would jeopardize the investigation. It's that black and white for us. Releasing any records, much less all the records, which is what's being requested by Ms. Bremner, would jeopardize this investigation. It would call into question our continuing ability to solve the case. Therefore, we ask you to deny the appeal. That's it. That's where we stand. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Okay, so we've heard from the appellant as well as a response from the city.
Can I respond briefly?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me do this.
Yeah.
We didn't argue grandma. We argued the victims' rights statutes. And we argued Utah's, which applies in this state, and Washington's. We also didn't say that we didn't talk about civil redress, wanting civil redress in this case. And on an ongoing investigation, I mean, maybe it's black and white to say that, but you can say it. But the question is it? Is it an ongoing investigation? I think you need to look at that and see whether indeed it is. You know, I represent police departments, Seattle Police, Portland, Bellevue. That's what I've done my whole career. I believe in police departments, and I defend them. But I also think in a case like this, victims have rights. In a case that's done where the suspect is dead, and they have every right in this case, a constitutional right in Utah, not Washington, Utah, to get these records. Thank you.
As you can see, our scouts were very good at leaving some space here, and so if you want to yes, stay tight, because I think we have questions. Does anybody have questions of either side here?
I have a question I'd like to ask the city attorney, Mr. Gunderson, first, and then ask some questions for Ms. Bremner. Mr. Gunderson, is this a question of classification? And what I mean by that is if we determine that these records are not protected, does that mean that they are public or available to everybody, or are they just available to Ms. Bremner, as she suggests?
You are able under our ordinance, sir, to, if you release the records, to restrict them from further dissemination under our ordinances.
Okay, thank you. I have questions for Ms. Bremner.
Ms. Bremner, could Would you mind coming up here and...
How are you, Ms. Bremner?
I'm fine, how are you?
Glad that you are here.
Thank you.
Looking at the documents that you provided in your records request, there were 3 times that I counted. You did an initial records request with a letter following that, and then a letter following that, which appealed it to this body. I don't think that I'm missing any correspondence, am I?
No, you're not.
Okay.
No, those are the 3 items of correspondence, that's correct. One to the police chief, one to the city manager, and then one to this body.
The longer letter of explanation that I have is dated April 26, 2012. And in the second paragraph, it says, pursuant to our client's rights under Utah's Government Records Access and Management Act, GRAMA, and Washington's Public Records Act, PRA, we are requesting, then it goes on with the request. And yet tonight you're telling us you're not arguing GRAMA, and certainly you would agree that Washington statute does not apply here.
Well, let me take that in 2 parts. As I've said and as I've made the mainstay of all my arguments and the statutes I've cited to you, it's the victims' rights laws. And GRAMA is general, public records. I don't cite any part of GRAMA in here on Utah saying that there's, other than to talk about the ongoing investigation issue, my main argument has always been victims' rights. Now, the other thing that you just asked me now I forgot it. The second thing you just asked me.
I think I only asked you one thing.
Okay, well...
Why you're saying you're not arguing GRAMA, but that's the reason you gave us in your correspondence when you could have given any reason as you drafted this in your office. That's the reason you gave us. Under GRAMA, I'm entitled to these records.
Pursuant to our client's rights under Utah's Government Records Act, etc., and Washington's Public Records Act, we are requesting, etc. Then it goes on and cites the statutes on victims' rights. Those are RCW 7.69, Crime Victims, Survivors, and Witnesses, RCW 42.56. Then it goes on the second page, 3rd full paragraph, to cite the Utah Victims' Rights Act, where it says, under both states' Victims' Rights Act, the rights extend, etc., to victims and witnesses are to be honored and protected by law in a manner no less vigorous than protections afforded criminal defendants. I would argue to you the way I put this was an umbrella on public records, and what I've argued all along is victims' rights.
Okay, I have another question for you. You mentioned some litigation regarding insurance policies and the like, correct?
Yes.
Has it been determined by any court that Susan Powell is dead?
No. And that is an interpleader case. There's 2 interpleader cases. One's brought by New York Life Insurance and one's by Beneficial Life. And each of those have resulted in them giving their money to the registry of the court. That's what an interpleader is. And asking the court to make the decision amongst the various competing interests of who should get the proceeds. So both those cases have no finding of a death, nor is it required there be a finding of a death.
Okay, but there's been no finding of a death. And that leads me to my next question, because in looking at your records request, in April, you do not mention Chuck or Judy Cox. Looking at your letter of April, you do not mention Chuck or Judy Cox. Looking at your letter of June, you do not mention Chuck or Judy Cox. And in your letter of July, you do not mention Chuck or Judy Cox. You say that you represent the estate and heirs of Susan Powell. And I would propose that if she has not been determined dead, she has no estate or heirs.
Well, at this point, that is the general entity that's been opened. I've represented Chuck and Judy Cox for 2 years, and I'm here on their behalf.
Well, it would have been nice if you told us in your letter who you represent, rather than stating that you represent heirs that have not been determined or an estate that has not been opened.
Well, I am not the lawyer for the estate or anything else. There's all kinds of things being set up right now so that Chuck can go in and deal with her affairs here in West Valley City and elsewhere. So there's no, estate per se in terms of...
My law firm represents the estate of Susan Cox Powell, and yet you're not the lawyer for the estate you're telling us tonight.
Well, I'm not going to get in an argument with you.
I'm just trying to understand your request.
We, with another law firm, represent the entities involved in this case.
That's all the questions I have of Ms. Bremner.
The other council members have questions of Ms. Bremner tonight?
May I have a question with Mr. Gilmore, please?
And I do apologize for my tone, but this has been a very long haul. I've been pro bono for years, and I'll tell you, it's been every day you think it can't get any worse than it does. And so I have the emotional, I think, impact from having been involved with this family for a long time. So I apologize for my tone.
No, we can appreciate it, Ms.
Thank you.
Brenner. Before you sit down, maybe it would be helpful for you to just define for us under the state statute what victims are, because I know you said in your statements that they meet the requirements of what a victim is. And so can you tell us what the statute is on that?
The victims and families of victims.
So the state law is that it's victims and immediate family
Yes.
of victims.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Councilmember Hume wants to direct some questions to Mr. Gilmore.
Mr. Gilmore, thank you for showing up tonight. We say that. My question is, how long have you been working on this case?
I've been working on this case with the West Valley City Police Department for a little over a year.
Over a year,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Not from the beginning. Like I said, by trade, I am not a civil attorney. I'm kind of a little ashamed and a little proud of that. I am a prosecutor. I've been a prosecutor my entire career. It's only with city cutbacks that I became the police legal advisor as well.
Okay, and have you been continuing to work on this case?
Yes.
Okay.
Not in a prosecutorial capacity, but just in a police legal advisor capacity. The DA's office, I'm a city prosecutor. We handle Class A misdemeanors and below. The DA's office was the entity that was working closely with our police in the potential criminal investigation. But I did work with the police in a police legal advisor capacity.
Thank you. No further question.
I have a question for Mr. Gilmore.
Sure.
Mr. Gilmore, are the police actively investigating the disappearance of Susan Cox Powell?
They are absolutely actively investigating the disappearance of Susan Cox Powell, and Ms. Brenner did mention, Josh Powell is dead, and I think it's a fair point, it's a fair question, and it's a fair curiosity to raise. Josh Powell is dead, and being as careful as possible, I hope it's obvious that the West Valley City Police Department is not pursuing an investigation in hopes of convincing a prosecutorial agency to file criminal charges against Josh Powell. That's not what's going on. This is, though, having said that as a baseline, this is an ongoing investigation. An ongoing investigation that, if these records are released, would jeopardize our ability to pursue this case to the end.
Mr. Gilmore, do you know when the police department has last done any work on this case?
This week. It's better, discretion is the better part of valor. This week, Mr. Bueller.
Mr. Gilmore, do you agree with the interpretation by Ms. Brenner that victims under the statute include victims and families of victims?
I want to be very careful. That's an emotional issue. And I argue loss. And I don't want to, let me say it this way.
Well, I'll ask you more questions. I just
Well,
want to
I'm
know,
just
is
saying-
that a correct interpretation, victims and families of victims? I mean, we'll decide, I guess, who victims and families of victims are, but is that correct that it includes victims and families of victims?
Our position is that we're here on a grandma appeal, that the law that governs this decision deals with the grandma statute, not the victim rights statute. There is a different forum to argue that, and there is arguments that could be made on both sides on whether or not there was a victim in this case. The problem is I don't want to diminish or insult the Cox family by even suggesting that they have not suffered greatly. And so to answer that question, I don't want to, but that would be open to interpretation if there was any victims still in this state. I'm not talking about the Cox family's grandchildren that died in the state of Washington, but in this state, that would still be open.
That's kind of what I was wondering about, because certainly the boys were victims.
And I sense that
And
by the questions you asked.
The grandparents are a family of those victims, but
That's
those
exactly right.
acts and the victimization occurred in the state of Washington.
That's exactly right, and that would be their investigation. And while there was cooperation between the West Valley City Police Department and authorities in the state of Washington, there were separate cases going on. Separate cases with separate evidence, there was cooperation and sharing of some information. In fact, sharing of some information that was released to our chagrin, because that jeopardizes our ongoing investigation. But their investigation, their laws, what they released are under their jurisdiction. We are still pursuing our case.
And would we need a Utah victim for this to fall under the victim's rights?
That would be my opinion, yes.
And we may all assume and believe and expect that Susan Cox Powell was victimized of some crime here in the state of Utah, but has that crime been determined?
I don't even know if it would be appropriate for me to stand on your supposition. I don't want to say, well, this is an ongoing investigation. We want to solve this case. And to disclose anything that has about this case would jeopardize the case and would jeopardize our ability to follow through in the way that this case deserves.
What I'm thinking is that unless we have an identifiable victim of a Utah crime in Utah, we cannot have family of that victim. Would you agree with that?
Yes, if you want to even go there. But I don't believe that, I think even going there, you're taking this hearing before this body in a place that it doesn't belong. You are here to determine an appeal based on grandma. That's it. You don't have the authority to determine who is a victim. You don't have the authority to determine who has rights under the Victim Rights Statute. You have the authority to determine what is the grandma statute and whether or not these records are protected. And we are telling you, because it's an ongoing investigation, they are protected.
Well, Ms. Bremner's arguing that it's under the Victim's Rights Statute. What's the appropriate forum for that argument?
She needs to file that in a different court. You are not a court of law. You're not, no offense to you, but you are not authorized to make that determination.
Do you know if there is an ongoing investigation of any sort regarding the Powells or the Coxes, particularly Susan Cox or the boys in the state of Washington?
I do not know. I'm not their police legal advisor. I can only guess.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Mr. Bunderson, I wanted to bring in, I have a lot of the same questions along your line, but would you concur with that opinion that as far as the proper forum for a victim's right appeal as opposed to a grandma appeal?
Yes, sir.
Being above and beyond the purview of this body?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
May I sit? Or
any more questions of Mr. Gilmore? We have him here. Okay. Yeah.
If I can speak in
Please do. We want to take as much information as we can.
I really appreciate it. I just wanted to point out to Councilman Bueller that nothing in here says anything about representing Susan Cox Powell's heirs. But second, that these have been lengthy letters about the victims' rights statutes, and I've gone on at length about victims' rights laws. I only followed what I was told to do. I went to the police chief and made the request that my first letter is April 26th to the chief and to the sheriff. And then I was told that I had to appeal to the city manager. I did that. And then I was told I had to come here. Now, if what's being suggested is I have to go file a lawsuit in the courtroom, I guess that's my next step, whether it's from a denial here or from your court case. But I think where I started is this is getting long, protracted, expensive for my clients, and it's something that I simply followed what I was asked to do. And finally, with respect to the intros of my letter, I do talk generally about Public Records Acts, but that's what we always do, always, when asking about victims' rights, access to records, because you have to look at the public records legislation and then to victims' rights laws. So it's really just an umbrella and in context. And then finally, they have released records. They released a lot of records from the West Valley City Police. There was a recent document distribution, shall we say. That search warrant affidavit was unsealed with all the disturbing information. I'd submit to you, and finally in my argument, that this is a waiver by the West Valley City Police. They have legal counsel. They know that if they start releasing things, it belies their argument that this is an ongoing investigation that will be compromised. Thank you.
May I respond? Thank you for your clarification that you do not represent or claim to represent the heirs. However, I'd like to read to you from your letter of April. We have been retained by Susan Cox Powell's heirs.
Well, that's one out of many letters. Every one of these.
That's the one you sent to us.
Well, you know what? If you look at all of these, and I'm not sure, it's obvious that you have formed an opinion, and I regret that, to point out something like that, because the letters all say, this law firm represents the estate of Susan Cox Powell and her family.
And her heirs.
As I stated, each letter opens like that. So, you know, I know you're in an important government position here. I hope you do the right thing, and I hope you do it in fairness.
We will, thank you.
Mr. Gilmore, did you have anything to add on the previously released things that was brought up right there?
What was released earlier this month were records in the possession of the 3rd District Court. Unlike police investigative records, which are protected, records in the possession of the court are presumed public. Those records are the court's records. As soon as they're turned over to the court, they become the court's record. They're not our records. Those records were under seal, and parts of those records remain under seal. However, the court agreed to release redacted version of their records, not West Valley City's records. As soon as we filed them as part of our investigation, they became their records, not our records. The judge signs those search warrants. We have to give them that information in order to continue our investigation. But as soon as we hand them over, they are no longer our records. And in fact, when the judge executes that document, it becomes the court's records. And so we don't get to protect them anymore. The court agreed to release redacted versions of their records when the state of Washington released its documentation, and a review of the 84 documents in the possession of the 3rd District Court, not in our possession, revealed that some of the released information was also contained in the court's sealed records. The court made the determination that it was of the disposition at that point to release those records. We objected. We're still trying to protect our ongoing investigation to solve this case. And so we fought those records release, and we won redactions in those records. And those redactions are important to the ongoing nature of this investigation so that we can solve this case. That is what we are trying to do, and that's what I hope we are trying to do as a city, is still solve this case and not give up on it. We're trying to follow through, and so that's why we're asking you to deny this appeal. That's all I have.
Council members, do you have need of any more information from either groups tonight, or questions of the council legal attorney? At this point, I can get my back together. It might be, I think, appropriate at this time to ask the city council attorney, Mr. Bunderson, if he could kind of give us kind of the next steps and the options to the city council.
Sure, sir. If the council is done taking information, if that phase is indeed over, then the council at some point may deliberate in private to come to an agreement as to the appeal and what they wish to do. We have, you have from today now, 5 business days to release the records or uphold Mr. Pyle's denial of those records.
Okay, with that information, council members, open it up to discussion on next steps, or
I would move that we convene in private deliberations 5 minutes after the conclusion of this meeting.
I'll second that.
And I can leave records here. I also want to clarify that we do have a claim filed in Washington State under the estate of Susan Cox Powell as a missing person with a guardian ad litem, and that's been filed about a month ago. Okay. So the reference there as to her estate.
thank you. Okay, so we have a motion, a second, to convene in deliberations 5 minutes following the conclusion of business of this regular meeting. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, it seems like the prudent thing to do. We've gained all the information, so all vote in favor of it, and ask all those who are in favor of the motion to please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Sir, we didn't hear who seconded the motion.
Well, I kind of had 2. I was in stereo. So
Okay.
whoever...
Steve and Don.
Okay.
So the vote was unanimous, and City Council will convene after this meeting to take into account all the information that's been taken in this evening regarding this application. So with that, we'll move on to our next item of business, which is a consent agenda of 2 items. It's a reappointment to the Licensing Board and a public utility easement.
I would move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor of approving these 2 items of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Seeing no need for an executive session and no other business, this body will stand adjourned.